phenomenal fortunes got made just like in the 70s, with that stuff, with that cocaine in the 80s. But it just had a lot more detrimental effect because the young people got involved in it. And it changed a lot of what it was. And in our society, this whole hip hop culture is still pretty much victimized from what happened. I didn't know it. I knew people who knew, like Rich Porter, some of those guys when I was after college in New York. Rich Porter and that crew that was up in Harlem doing their thing. It was crazy. Yeah, you go to a Chinese restaurant and order Chinese dinner, and then there was a guy in the corner you could spend $100,000 with. So we all need to think about that in this hip hop culture. The young people making, and I'm when I say young, I mean under 20, being involved in the streets. That was a phenomenon of the 80s, and what happened when that Iran-Contra and the events that followed that all happened. But we should be clear about that. That wasn't Rich Porter or just Pablo Escobar and some Colombians who were behind that. And again, there's a Tom Cruise movie coming out that they really go into that, and it's documented now. Everybody knows really what happened. Oliver North went to jail for it, so everybody kind of knows. And I guess, again, we have to be sensitive about these kind of topics. But being my father's son and having met people in my father's name, and obviously our association with Eddie and again, we have to be sensitive about these conversations. But banks, people, the media, and the banking industry and society, and those who are learned who follow these things. Wells Fargo has been indicted for money laundering. Chase Bank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America. Almost every major SHBC, almost every major bank, 2 or 3 times a decade, you're going to hear of a major bank involved in money laundering. I'm not here to make a moral judgment. I wish, substance abuse is a horrible plague in America. The thing is, people will practice vice. Alcoholism is a horrible thing, but Budweiser and Seagram's and all the liquor manufacturers continue to do what they do. Gambling addiction is a horrible thing, but nobody talks about shutting down Las Vegas. And I am not the Pope nor the police, but people should be aware, and I'm not speculating. The monies that circulate in the underworld end up reappearing in the quote-unquote legitimate world. And that's whether it's Wells Fargo, Bank of America, or your local party store that you see, or the local bowling alley that you see, where the actual funds for that to come up with. We should really, the public should be not so naive about those things. That you think that governments and banks are loaning money to governments and people in Costa Rica and Colombia and Peru and Bolivia based upon their belief that they're going to get paid back in what? And I just ask people to ask themselves that. What exactly do you think those people in many parts of the world are using as collateral when they do financing at an international level? I'm just saying. In the way the underworld and organized crime work to get involved in it, because when the price of cocaine fell as rapidly as it did, a guy working at the plant all of a sudden could take half his paycheck and go buy an ounce of coke. Next thing you know, now you got a guy who was a factory worker on Monday, and now on Friday he's a dope man. Well, these people didn't understand all that went with it. People who've never had money, when they get exposed to it and haven't gone through basically an internship. So then the violence, 17-year-olds, when 17-year-olds have access to $300,000, things that grown men who are seasoned in the business would say, look, let's have a sit down and talk about this. It's no sense in letting this get carried away. Well, when you get 17 and 18-year-olds dealing with that kind of money, no one has the wisdom, no one's been schooled to say, look, let's have a sit down. Goldfarb Bail Bonds and Company, Chuck and Irving Goldfarb, Irving, God rest in peace. Biggest bail bondsman in the Detroit metropolitan area, probably one of the biggest operations in the country. Those guys had interest in casinos in Vegas all the way back in the 70s, construction, and all different types of business interests. They end up actually, at one time Eddie probably had $300,000, $400,000 in bond. He's paying his own bond. He's under dual state and federal indictment. He's paying the bond for all 31 members of his crew throughout the entire court process. So that's appeal, district court appeal, circuit court appeal, all the way up to the final appeal to the Supreme Court. And the Goldfarbs continued to write and support Eddie. They always got their money back because they always showed up for court. But through that, a lot of those stories, like where Eddie and My Old Man meet Frank Matthews in Vegas, meet Red Fox, Bill Cosby, a lot of those celebrities who they ended up crossing paths had a lot to do with the fact their relationship with the Goldfarbs and some of the relationships and the treatment they got when they were in Vegas. And just some really good business advice also. The guys like the Goldfarbs had been around the block. They ran in affluent, educated circles. They were able to give Eddie and My Old Man, some insights in the private school that I went to and that my sister went to. That's following the advice of people like them. And I guess me being a businessman, a business consultant nowadays. Sister went on to become an attorney and things like that. Family, went on and legitimized its affairs. And a lot of that came from having advice from people like that. But even, back in the day, they were well connected. Connected to everybody. So that's just a little backstory on the Goldfarbs. H. Ross Black, Milton Henry, leader, the two lead attorneys on the legal team, kept these guys out of jail for 6 years. That'll never happen again, right? They were indicted in 71. They don't go to prison until 77. That'll never happen again. H. Ross Black was F. Lee Bailey. F. Lee Bailey is the lawyer that represented O.J. Simpson, Patty Hearst, Boston Strangler, one of the most famous lawyers in American history. His partner was H. Ross Black, who was the lead attorney, as we talk about in the book and in the documentary. And yeah, it's true. The lawyers, of course, always get paid. This is the reality of that life in the underworld. That, win, lose, or draw. I guess I remember my mom actually. She was a realist about the situation, and when it's all said and done, the only winners in court systems are the lawyers, because the lawyers always go home. That's the reality of it. And of course, the jewelers win too. I look back, the private jewelers on the big time jewelers would come from all over the country and sit in our living room, when I was a kid, and sell the Old Man and Eddie rings and watches and special pendants, and all that goes with it too. I guess in the modern day times, you hear the rappers talking about Jacob the jeweler and that kind of thing. Those guys, Eddie and my pops were doing those kind of things, 40 years ago. Private jewelers coming to the house making special pieces. The pendant, I think that Eddie wears in that ebony photo when he's at the Ali Frazier fight, the EJ pendant. That's like $150,000 back then, so that's like what, 1.5 million now, something like that. So the jewelers always won back then. The jewelers win now, whether it's the rap industry or the underworld. The jewelers won then, they win then. They always win. The accountants, the lawyers, they are, it's kind of like the story about who gets rich when people are digging for gold. It's the guy who sells the picks and shovels. Same kind of thing in the streets, the real reality of it. In the end, the winner is going to be the guys who came to the house selling, we didn't go to the mall a lot of the time. People who own clothing stores came to our house in the evening time when it was convenient to us, and they'd bring half their store. Of course, when you're handling the kind of money that Pops and Eddie were handling back then, you get that kind of treatment. Trust me, every time Jay-Z or Beyonce want a new outfit, they don't have to go to the store. People will bring it to them. Believe me, that's the way it goes down when you're really handling, at that level. Another frequently asked question is people, I guess, in hindsight, Cousin Lala in the documentary talked about how in 83, 84, those guys go to jail in 76, 77. They come home in like 83, 84. Eddie comes home in 83. My old man comes home in 84. And what was happening in the streets and how it had changed. And, you know, two major things occurred that separate the 80s from the 70s when it comes to this urban underworld and what was going on. As the Eddie Jacksons got arrested and went to jail, the Nicky Barnes got arrested and went to jail, the Frank Matthews fled, those people who had come up under the old kind rules where, you know, this kind of work was for men, kids, and teenagers didn't get involved in it. That had changed. You know, here in Detroit, you had the Young Boys Incorporated, you know, organization built around teenagers. That just would have never happened with the old guys who ended up going to jail in the late 70s. And then by 84, the introduction, unfortunately, well, it is what it is. I was going to say unfortunately, but I'm going to be a hypocrite. The introduction by the powers that be and the flooding of Americans' urban cities with crack cocaine. Cities like Detroit, I think, are just now recovering from it, and there's so many families and cities that in 83, cocaine, 83, 84, 85 even, it began to change. Cocaine was still pretty much revered as a drug of the rich and affluent. Right in that maybe 2-year period between 84 to 86, when the price of cocaine went from $50,000-$60,000 a kilo to $13,000 a kilo. You know, in New York City in the mid and late 80s, there were kids, Dominican kids were uptown selling bricks on the street. I mean, you could literally go up to Washington Heights, see a crew on the corner, and spend $200,000 with them, and it was right. I mean, that's what that was the insanity of what happened. I think now we have a lot more information that there were. I mean, you know, Iran-Contra, what was going on with Oliver North, and you know, and that administration, the Freeway Ricky Ross story of realities of what caused the price of cocaine to plummet like that, and what allowed for places like New York. I mean, New York and Miami, you know, at that period of time, you know, it was just crazy. And it allowed children, it allowed teenagers and people who really had no schooling in the way the underworld and organized crime worked to get involved in it, because when the price of cocaine fell as rapidly as it did, I mean, a guy working at the plant all of a sudden could take half his paycheck and go buy an ounce of coke. Next thing you know, now you got a guy who was a factory worker on Monday, and now on Friday he's a dope man. Well, these people didn't understand all that went with it. People who've never had money, when they get exposed to it and haven't gone through basically an internship. So then the violence, you know, 17-year-olds, when 17-year-olds have access to $300,000, things that grown men who are seasoned in the business would say, look, let's have a sit down and talk about this. It's no sense in letting this get carried away. Well, when you get 17 to 18-year-olds dealing with that kind of money, no one has the wisdom. No one's been schooled to say, look, let's have a sit down. No, they draw arms and people start getting shot. So the violence just escalated. You know, it was just too much money. It was too much access. And the internship, the process that it existed, you know, started off being a runner, you know, being an errand boy for the bosses, then you work your way up the ranks. That was out the window. You know, kids were going from having paper routes to dealing, you know, in large scales of narcotics. That wasn't just here in Detroit. That was all over, and that was precipitated by just the flooding of it by the powers that be. You know, we know now that it wasn't just Pablo Escobar. You know, my pops had friends down in the Caribbean. You know, they were doing big things. You know, we talked about it. We got some more to be, you know, obviously sensitive about some of these things I'm speaking about now. You know, but you know, in my youth or in my college days, when we'd go down to the islands, it was blatant corruption. It was very obvious that this was a situation that to the highest ranks of government, through many of the Caribbean countries, through the DEA here in America. You know, the DEA knew who my father was. DEA just taking money from me at Miami International Airport. I mean, they'll just know who you are, know that you have money, and know what your associates or family into, whether you're doing something right or wrong. I hadn't broken any law. It's just the reality of it. You know, DEA pulls you over, puts you in a room, and knows you got some money on you. What are you gonna do? And that's just reality. You know, and that was a long time ago, guys. You know, that was when I was young, not the boring middle-aged businessman that I am now. But there was a time, and yeah, in '84, at '84 through '86 was a crazy situation when the powers that be again. You know, I think there's a movie coming out very soon with Tom Cruise in it, who kind of goes over that whole Iran Contra and the insanity of how much drugs they brought into this country. And, you know, the guys in the street who were plugged in, yeah, made a ton of money, but nobody knew how or why something to come out. How, you know, it was so. Even when I was in college, the thought of a poor person. When I started college, the thought of a poor person using cocaine was insane. It was something that the affluent and successful did. You know, you fast forward by the '90s, cocaine was associated with poverty and you know, the term crack house and things like that had become part of the American vocabulary, stuff that just never existed. So that was a big difference. The '70s, the '60s, and the '70s, as far as in the urban community, there was definitely a hierarchy. People worked their way up. It functioned a lot more like maybe other ethnic groups, organized crime families, whether it be the Italians, the Chinese triads, or the Albanians, the Russians. There were people who already were in it, who introduced people into it, whether it be through family or friendship connections. Those people got involved in the streets or in the underworld. You know, when they locked up and left that void of leadership in the '70s, and then that